What's up, guys? So I actually meant to film this video like 2 days ago when I was 7 days out, but today I'm 5 days out, so it's not too far off. But this video was going to be kind of trying to dispel a few myths or misconceptions about bodybuilders and their peak week, or the things that they do coming into contest. Because I know that there's a lot of people out there who kind of have these crazy beliefs of, like, they think bodybuilders do all these crazy things before they go to a contest. And I will say that there definitely are some bodybuilders, probably kind of a lot of competitors out there, who still do these things and that still subscribe to these beliefs. But I would say that the main reason that people still believe these things is just because it's conventional wisdom. And just like any kind of conventional wisdom, it's just something that's perpetuated by convention. Like, just because one person believes it, then they tell somebody else, and they tell somebody else, and they tell somebody else, and it just kind of keeps going on like that. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's right. And I don't think that's the way you should go about learning really anything. Like, whenever you learn something, I think that you should always try to be absolutely sure that it's founded in some kind of evidence, or there's some kind of science supporting it. Because, I mean, there's really no way to be absolutely sure, but if there's no evidence supporting it, then there's no reason to believe it. But anyways, the first thing I wanted to talk about was dehydrating for contest. So there's a lot of people out there who have this idea that if you're about to get on stage, or like a few days out, and you still look a little bit fat, that the reason you still look fat is because you're holding water or something. Like, they think that there's a bunch of water in between your skin and your muscle that's hiding your muscle. But the simple fact is that if you still look a little bit fat, then you're just a little bit fat. Like, there's no two ways about it. Like, if you don't look shredded on stage, it's just because you're not shredded. That's just the way it is. But yeah, I mean, like, the idea, I guess, is that by dehydrating, they're going to get rid of all this water that's somehow, like, on top of their muscle, underneath their skin. But it definitely doesn't work like that. Like, you don't just lose water from one area. Just like you can't spot reduce fat, you can't spot reduce water either. And the reason I say that you shouldn't cut water is, for one thing, it's unhealthy. It's bad. It's really bad for your health. And for another thing, if you consider for a moment that the density of water is 1 gram per cubic centimeter, a cubic centimeter being the same thing as a milliliter, right? And then they say that your total mass of your body is somewhere between like 60 and 70% of your, or water is like 60 to 70% of your total weight or whatever. So if you figure that 60 or 70% of your mass is water, and water has a density of 1 gram per cubic centimeter, that's a lot of volume that you're losing when you're dehydrating. So it definitely doesn't work for making you look less fat. So why would you dehydrate if it's going to make you look that much smaller, right? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then the next thing on the list is sodium and potassium manipulation. And this is one of those things that, if you think about the way that your body works, it kind of makes a little bit of sense, but in practice it doesn't make as much sense as you might hope. So the idea, and this is a very, very basic way of explaining it, but the idea is that sodium is an extracellular ion, so it acts outside of the cells, and people think that it makes you hold water outside of your cells, like an extracellular fluid in your blood and stuff like that. And then they also think that potassium is an intracellular ion, making you hold water inside your cells. So you would think, based on that, that having a bunch of potassium and very little sodium would make you look shredded. But you have to consider that a lot of the volume of your muscle, like a lot of the space that your muscle takes up, it's not just muscle cell. It is largely made up of extracellular fluid, like the fluid that surrounds your muscle cells. So if you were to deplete all your sodium, then by that logic, you wouldn't have a whole lot of water or a whole lot of extracellular fluid to fill that space, so you would look smaller. And another thing is that without, like, if you don't have a whole lot of sodium, it's hard for you to, well, like, sodium is known to increase blood pressure slightly, and if you have like no sodium, then your blood pressure will be really low, which sounds good for your health. But prior to contest, like prior to getting on stage, I would say you'd actually want a little bit more sodium, because an increase in blood pressure will make you look vascular on stage. But having a crazy amount of sodium all the time obviously isn't good for your health, so that's just something that you would do for contests. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is carbs. And I mean, there's a lot of different ideas about carbs. And in order to kind of understand any of them, you have to have a basic idea of what carbs do for your body. And I'm going to try to make this as simple and basic as I can, but I don't know, we'll see how good I am at explaining, I guess. So whenever you eat carbs, whether it be from starch or from simple sugar or whatever it is, at some point after it's digested, it's going to end up as a monosaccharide. And basically, the main monosaccharide in our body is glucose. And then, so after everything's digested, it's going to end up as glucose, which is going to be absorbed in the first part of your small intestine. And then from there, it's going to end up in your bloodstream. So after you eat carbs or any source of carbs or whatever, there's going to be a bunch of blood glucose floating around, and your level of blood glucose is going to be higher than normal. And then what happens after this is your pancreas will detect this kind of change, and it will try to regulate by releasing insulin. And what insulin does is it basically it makes your body store excess glucose as glycogen in your liver and your muscles. And so this is where the idea that comes from, that manipulating carbs can make you look fuller by storing more glycogen, and that's definitely true. But yeah, but the only thing about that is that if you go over a certain amount of glucose, like if you go crazy with carbing up or whatever, then what's going to happen is your body or your muscles and liver can only store so much glycogen, and once it passes that point, your body will store whatever extra blood glucose you have as body fat, and that's what's known as spilling over, and that's what I did last week at the Central Valleys. But yeah, so then there's basically two different ideologies when it comes to carbs for contest. One is that there are a lot of bodybuilders who think that they should be on a ketogenic diet, like very low carbs or no carbs or whatever. And I will say that there are a lot of NPC competitors and iifym pros who do this, and they make it work. But you have to understand that those guys, I'm not knocking them or anything, but they are taking a lot of stuff that will help them retain muscle while they get rid of fat, so they can kind of get away with that. Whereas us drug-free athletes, not so much. We can't get away with doing stuff like that, because what will happen is when you're in a large caloric deficit like you would be when you're cutting, your body kind of thinks that it's starving. So if you're not eating a whole lot of carbs, for one thing, you're not going to have a lot of energy because you're not going to have a normal level of blood glucose to begin with. And since you don't have an elevated level of blood glucose, or even a normal level, you're not going to be storing any glycogen. So you're going to have basically no glycogen stored up in your muscles. And your body is going to have to recruit energy from other sources like your muscles and your fat. And that sounds kind of good because obviously you want to get rid of fat. But like I said, at this point you would be in a large caloric deficit, and your body will kind of think that it's starving. And whenever your body thinks that it's starving, it's going to tend to store more of its calories as fat, because fat is more like long-term storage. And for the sake of survival, if your body does think that it's starving and it needs to survive, it's going to be more ready to break down your muscles because that's not as essential to your survival. So if you're on a super low-carb diet and you're not taking all kinds of drugs to help you out, then what's going to happen is that you're going to end up losing a lot of muscle and not as much fat as you would like. And then the way that I think that you should go about screwing with your carbs, if you do at all, is you should taper up your carbs. Like maybe it depends on each person and depends how experienced you are with this, because, well, okay, I won't claim to be an expert on peak week or whatever, because obviously I messed that up real bad at the Central Valleys, and I spilled over really hard. But I mean, it's like I've said before, I'm still young and I'm still learning. But I still do believe that there is some merit in tapering up your carbs before contest, because just the way you think about it is, if you have more carbs, if you can decrease that deficit as you get closer and closer to contest day, you will be able to store more of your carbs as muscle glycogen. And the only thing you have to avoid is spilling over. So if you do something like this where you taper up carbs the week before, however many days before your contest, just be sure that you don't go over maintenance and you spill over and end up looking fatter. But yeah, I mean, it's even like the most ideal peak week or whatever, or the most ideal tapering of your carbs won't make you look a whole lot different on stage. So I would say that if it's your first time trying this out, and you're coming up to a really important contest, you might not even want to do it for this one. you might as well wait, because you would look a lot worse on stage if you spilled over than if you just kept your carbs where they're at and ended up looking a little less full on stage. And I think that's about it for this video. I'm sure there's a lot of other like misconceptions that I haven't talked about, but like I said, I don't know everything, and I'm still trying to learn myself, but I hope this helps some of you guys out there. If you like what I'm doing, be sure to subscribe, and I think that's it. So thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.